facts, and truth.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, folks, welcome back. We're still in the first hour here at TNT Today's News Talk. Great discussion, of course, with TNT's political editor, Basil Valentine. Nobody really has their finger on the pulse like Basil does. This is why we really enjoy talking to him, especially about UK politics and also what's happening in Europe. Basil also has his finger on that pulse as well. But somebody else who is in close proximity to the machinations of European elites, the EU and NATO, is our next guest. He's an independent researcher, a journalist. He's also a contributor at 21stCenturyWire.com. Freddie Ponton joining us right now on the live link. Freddie, great to have you with us this week.
Hey, it's good to be here, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
Freddie, what can I say? I want to kick off and get your comment on NATO. There are announcements that Jens Stoltenberg, who's been occupying that chair for quite a long time, is going to be replaced by Mark Rutte from the Netherlands. And all I can say, it's like that sign on, we'll bring this picture up, on this NATO picture up on screen here, but it's like that sign, Freddie. You ever see that? New management, and then parentheses, same as the old management. And as I tweeted recently this week, they've managed to pull off the Eurobot cloning experiment. It's complete. We have a new clone of Jens Stoltenberg from the Netherlands. What do you know about this guy, and what does this mean, or does it mean anything?
Well, it means a lot, and it doesn't mean a lot at the same time. I think we got used to Jens Stoltenberg and his crazy statements and his erratical hands. I call it an anarchic hands. He's someone extremely nervous, and I've obviously never been a big fan of Jens Stoltenberg, because simply for what he stands for and how he explains, and the lack of, I would say, maturity in his discourse. So we might disagree on the political aspect of it, but at least from a top leader of an organization such as NATO, you would expect some form of diplomacy, some form of coherence and common sense as well. But we can clearly see that these are people that have been placed by the United States, and Mark Rutte is not going to be any different in that respect. Now, of course, we need to look a little bit further for Mark Rutte, because he's less known. People have kind of talked a lot about Jens Stoltenberg, but it's really interesting to understand a little bit more Mark Rutte as a possible Secretary General of NATO. So right now, what's happening is we have last week in Budapest the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who basically announced that he was stepping down in October, but he wanted to get a deal with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán to ensure that Hungary would not block NATO plans for Ukraine. And the deal was very clear that Orbán will only do that and not veto, basically, Mark Rutte on the strength of an agreement. So it's important to understand that NATO takes all its decisions by consensus, and giving any of the 32 members basically veto power. So at this moment in time, there's only two countries. There was until yesterday Hungary, and then still Romania is remaining as a possible veto power here to stop Mark Rutte from becoming the next Secretary General of NATO. But that, of course, was very interesting. We saw Mark Rutte basically agreeing pretty much on all the requirements from Viktor Orbán, and that's basically been inked. So at this moment in time, I think he's got a clear go-ahead from Viktor Orbán. We'll see how Romania evolves. I mean, I don't see any real problem as far as Romania is concerned to let Mark Rutte go ahead with this position. So, of course, the real question, Patrick, is what should we be expecting from someone like Mark Rutte? I think that's the question that perhaps from your side of the world in the United States, people are going to want to know who's this guy. He's not known. He's known to European, to a certain degree internationally, but in the United States, probably people will be wondering who's these guys and what should be expecting. Now, he's definitely, the bottom line, he's a very strong ally to Ukraine. He's a very strong critic of the Russian president. So nothing is going to change on that front. And I suspect it might even be worse than what we had with Jens Stoltenberg. So that's where we are at the moment. And then, of course, we need to understand how these Secretary General are vetted. How does they actually get the job? Why Mark Rutte? Why not someone else? And it's quite clear that the United States has a huge input in that decisions, and they need to find someone that's going to take the knee at Washington, D.C. and make sure that these guys fulfill two major criteria. One being pro-Israeli, that's absolutely 100%, and the second is to be absolutely pro-Ukraine. And then the rest is to be part of this global consortium, this global, make America, make the United Kingdom great again, build back better, and all this great reset nonsense. This is a big family, and they all know each other's. And if you're not a member of the club, there's absolutely no way they're going to entrust you with a job like Secretary General of NATO. So no surprise, as I say, for the candidate. Perhaps on a more personal level, I think it's interesting to understand the career of the man. I can give you a very quick snapshot because it's very telling as well, and perhaps it's going to surprise a few people in your audience. But Rutte basically was elected as a member of the parliament 2 months before the invasion of Iraq, and he supported basically the 2003 invasion. And then soon after, he became a junior minister and the leader of the free market conservative party known as the VVD in the Netherlands. That was in 2007. And then 3 years later, in 2010, he became prime minister in the most right-wing Dutch government since 1945, which was supported by Geert Wilders' Freedom Party. And that's very telling because we also, Wilders basically striking a massive win last year during the general election in the Netherlands, although it was not possible for him to rule because the Netherlands political landscape is extremely fractured. And unless you're going to have a strong coalition, there's no way you can govern. And that is the reason why he did not take the job. So it's interesting to understand that Mark Rutte is really held a milestone in furthering the mainstreaming of far-right ideologies and movements, if you will, in the Netherlands. So that's something that is important to understand because it explains the rapprochement with Netanyahu. Mark Rutte's basically from October the 7th, onwards, he was very loud about, completely supporting Israel, being very much, basically going in the sense of Israel had the right to defend itself and so on and so forth, visited Israel, went to Ramallah. This is someone that is extremely involved in this international scene and clearly is seen as a very strong ally to Israel, even from Netanyahu. So here we go. You got a man that is obviously have very strong views, a very strong political stance, and I think this is quite unbelievable because we're seeing the European Union doing everything they can to basically salvage whatever there is to salvage at the European Commission and at the European Council to protect themselves from the surge of right populist parties, if you will. And you get at NATO someone that clearly thrives into the far-right environment. So that's a bit of a, something that is a bit of a dichotomy, if you will.
Yeah, no, the Dutch political scene, one must pay attention to this, Freddie, because as we both know, the Netherlands is one of the unsung financial centers of Europe. There is a lot of money that moves in and out of the Netherlands. A lot of power is there financially, global shipping, NATO, manufacturing. It's still very important in that respect. Plus an elite class that really counts itself at the top of the European pile, along with all the top British and German elites and royalty as well. And they're also a big feature at Bilderberg. So if you look at Bilderberg and how important that is for the Atlanticist bloc, the Netherlands are right there on the top table of that organization. But I look at this changing of the guard, as it were, at NATO is a big steam release for Jens Stoltenberg. So much bad energy has been built up. He will be, if he stays any longer, he'll be partly blamed for the debacle that's unfolding with Ukraine. And so he's done all he can to basically prod, poke, and provoke Russia. And then just after announcing they need to activate more nuclear weapons on European soil, he literally makes a runner for the door. I mean, this is just so typical of these people. So just to avoid any blame, a little public steam release on this, and off he goes to the Norwegian central bank. So from NATO to the head of a central bank. Isn't that amazing?
Well, these guys have no spine. We're not talking about leaders here. There's no leadership here in display. What we have is people that accept to be pawn. And when you're a pawn, you're going to be sacrificed. It's only a matter of time in the geopolitical landscape, in the geopolitical chessboard. You just a pawn and you will be sacrificed. So they accept that from day one. Mark Rutte will accept exactly the same thing. But they indent from themselves. They indent because they are huge ego, and these are people that are extremely political, that have very strong views, whether it's about Russia, whether it's about Israel, it doesn't matter. They are extremely strong views, and they've been exploited. They've been groomed into these positions, and they're entrusted. They're entrusted because they've been basically consistent with their message and with their political career. So there's no much surprise. So that's why we don't see leadership, because these are very predictable people.
No, indeed. Now, on the NATO front, Freddie, I want to get your opinion. We'll go to break in a minute, and we got more to discuss after that. But there is a sort of opposition bloc that's built in NATO now, and the spine of that really starts with Viktor Orban in Hungary, and then Robert Fico, who everybody knows by now, in his attempted assassination attempt on his life. He survived in Slovakia. And then we also have in the same neighborhood, Alexander Vučić, not a NATO member, not an EU member, but prospective EU member and allied with Russia. He's made a very strong speech, basically saying it's too late to stop the wheels of war. The elites in Europe have already decided, the establishment, that they're going to war with Russia, and there's going to be tremendous suffering and damage as a result. I mean, that was a pretty stark warning. It's a long statement. I think, at least 5 or 6 minutes or something like that. He really lays out what the issue is. So, I mean, it's not as if it's completely unanimous, Freddie. There are dissenters in Europe. And the question is, do you see any other countries joining that dissenting bloc in Central Europe against what everybody thinks is an inevitable war?
Well, it's a tricky question, because it is so political. Before being that has anything to do with NATO, you have to look at the political family of Europe. And clearly today, you still have 11 countries in Europe that are part of the EPP bloc, which is the center-right pro-European political party. So if you're in that family, you go alongside whatever goes. So there is no change that's going to happen there, because you're going to have, and you're going to want to have your champion at the European Commission or the European Council or the chief foreign policies, like Joseph Borrell, for example, in the European Council. So this is what dictates, really. NATO has a rapprochement, if you will, with the European Union. So all the decisions that are made, whether they are political, geopolitical, or military, they always have, and they always carry with them a European kind of political agenda behind it. And this has to be aligned. And where you see the crack is where there's already crack with the European Union. So that's how we can predict perhaps what will be the next crack, which the next country to give in terms of, moving away from NATO. And it will build up even more over the next few years, at least for the next 5 years, because we can clearly see, we saw last night, the entire European families, 27 countries coming together, trying to talk about, how to protect themselves from the far-right populist movements and wings and political parties across Europe that are surging and that are literally smashing it and marking points. This is something they cannot ignore, because within 5 years' time, if these people are allowed to mark points, deliver on their program, if they're allowed to, well, there's going to be some serious reshuffling going on, in the at least the European bloc political landscape, but also nationally speaking. So it's a major political kind of a renaissance, if you will. Whether we like it or not, we cannot ignore it. And I think in this process of Europe reinventing this political landscape, we're going to see a lot of dissonance with NATO and the European Union. So something to expect for sure.
Yeah, and it brings up a lot of interesting patterns in history, Freddie. I'll throw this out there. Actually, I want to draw a comparison to the years leading up to Second World War, and I want to get your opinion on this. Obviously, we're talking about the machinations of the EU and NATO, and some of the political trends that, quite frankly, are undeniable. A lot of the people decrying these trends, Freddie will call them the far right, and will, as the old saying goes, not far right, just right so far. But it's interesting if you look in history, what usually drives these types of trends is an economic recession or a back-to-back recession or depression, and a crisis in the cost of living, devaluation of the currency. We saw this, the reparations imposed and penalties imposed on Germany after the Treaty of Versailles in World War I, basically created the conditions for a radical National Socialist agenda, or the Nazi Party as an example. We could talk about Italy as well, with the rise of fascism in the interwar period there. But what's interesting, what happened in history, is the United States basically harnessed that. They bankrolled the Nazi war machine. Even during the beginning of the Second World War, they were still being financed and supported by the U.S. It wasn't until the U.S. entered in 1941, at the end of 1941, that maybe that overt support ceased for IG Farben and all these various industries that are being bankrolled by the Union Bank of New York. George Bush's grandfather, by the way, Prescott Bush, Henry Ford, ITT, IBM, the list is endless, okay? U.S. corporations backing Hitler. So it seemed like in that case, the U.S. realized this, rode that wave, got the European countries to fight each other as a result, and then marched in and as the savior, and then, swept up the ashes of the disaster afterwards and basically took over Europe after the Second World War. Let's not kid ourselves. Look at the dominance of U.S. financial institutions, the Marshall Plan, the occupation of Germany, France and Spain, Italy, all occupied, Britain even, by U.S. military forces for many decades. Germany still somewhat occupied, Freddie. So what I'm saying, Freddie, is this is an undeniable trend. There is a rising right wing in Europe. It's not going away, Freddie, is it? But what will happen? Where would the U.S. want to harness it, steer it, and then create some type of an outcome, maybe a war, in order to engineer some type of an outcome that they might benefit at the end? What are your thoughts on this, Freddie?
Well, the problem this time around is the United States has always been involved in European affairs, in NATO affairs. I mean, this has been, since the Second World War, and it's quite clear that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the United States should have gone home, but they never left. So they had to find a way to justify their presence, whether it was from a military point of view, from a security point of view, but then later on, different phases, of course, that's, long discussions. But it's clearly about, keeping control of the overall political and geopolitical agenda coming out of Europe, making sure that the communists is not going to get into it, making sure the Chinese are not going to benefit from a thriving Europe, and in controlling the reconstructions of Europe, controlling every aspect of the development. But on the way, obviously, a lot of things happen. Germany rebuilt itself extremely strongly, managed to put back an economy on the rail very quickly and becoming a very strong power, not only in Europe, but around the world. So this is a countries that are definitely the United States has kept an eyes on, has really kind of keep the lead on, if you will, making sure that at any time, it doesn't matter which party really is on board. It's irrelevant from the United States. What matters is that there is a control the level of control that are available to them, and they always are. But we are dealing in a different era at the moment, because we are dealing with a global environment where the United States is in danger. The hegemon is not working as it used to, and there are contenders. After the reconstructions, after the Second World War, there was no literally contenders, because there were so many people dead and economies were collapsed. So it was about rebuilding. It was about injecting money. There was a lot of business opportunities, and the spirit and the climate was completely different after the Second World War. There was a desire for peace. When you go through so much blood, so much suffering, people wanted peace, and there's no way you could have done anything unless you were promoting peace. So there was a beautiful 30, 40 years where America played a role, but understood and had the political acumen, had the political leadership that allows for peace. Today, the different animals we got in the Washington D.C.s, I couldn't care less about peace. They care about the Benjamin. They care about how much money and how rich they can get, in the process. So the political tendency, the political recuperations of dealing with far-right surge movements in Europe is really I wouldn't say really most of their priority. Their priority is to maintain their people, those that they build up the relationship with over the years in Germany, in France, in Netherlands, in Italy, and having these people under control. And you cannot just control the left and thinking the right will never be able to do something. That would be a huge mistake. So what you do is you bet on both sides. And that's exactly what happened after the Second World War, what happened during the World War, and that's what will happen within the next 5 years. The United States will not put all their eggs in the same basket. They'll understand the political landscape. They'll understand the demands, because these political parties exist because there, as you said, there is a demand. They fill a purpose. They provides basically what the other parties, what the left has failed to provide, and the lack of security, economic growth, and they're going to recoup all this little thematic and rhetoric and being able to build upon. That's why it takes longer for the right and for this kind of movement to take root, if you will. And when they do, they don't move. They're very strong, and Macron knows that. Von der Leyen knows that. All the globalist community in general knows that, and it's going to be very difficult to fight them because it's a popular movement. It's what the people want, and normally there's going to be a clash, and that's what we're going to see. We'll see that Ursula von der Leyen talked about it during an interview with the Bild last week when she talked about Macron's plan for France, why and what was the reason behind him calling the snap elections after dissolving the National Assembly, explaining that the ultimate goal is to obviously bring chaos, because that's the only way they're going to be able to assert their power. If there is chaos, which they can again grab upon emergency power, and we can clearly see that in two different ways. First, Macron's plan is very clear. It's about, he knows he's going to lose probably this election, and he's going to bring in basically the young Jordan Bardella. It's very talented. Don't have to agree with everything he said. He's got good ideas. He's got obviously a lack of political experience. But this is someone that has the capacities, is very much loved by many people in France, including the women. Seems to have a great appeal to women in France. But this is also very interesting because we can clearly see that Macron's, if you will, mentality, the spirit behind his fight back is not about just letting the democratic process take place. He wants to destroy it from inside, and the idea is to bringing basically the National Rally into governance, and having them fail, and basically making sure that they're going to impede the process all along, a little bit like basically Trump when he got into the presidential office in his mandate. He basically couldn't do anything. He was hammered. He was basically all the time under attack. That's basically the plan for Macron, is to burn the National Rally within them sitting in the government seats, and then from that manage enough chaos and create the chaos in France so that they can basically recoup that position. So you see, we give them a chance. They're really not good at anything. Well, you need us, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And now we know it, and it's been confirmed by Ursula von der Leyen. So I think what we're clearly going to see over the next few months is a rise in kind of chaos in France, in Germany. We're going to start to see the springing these groups of left, right, doesn't matter where they come from. We don't know where they're going to come from, but they're definitely going to go and make it difficult for the National Rally to perform or to prove themselves. So yes, it's there.
I think, Freddie, the evidence is in your favor on this. And again, I'm going to look at the Financial Times recently. They sort of gave the game away. The headline says it all, Freddie, and it's right along the lines of what you're talking about. Headline says this: Brussels to chide France over deficit spending as clash looms. But the subhead is the important part. EU officials fear bigger battle with Paris on budget rules if, quote, far right or far left take power after the election. So at the ECB level, the European Central Bank, they suddenly turn on their fire alarm just as the National Rally is coming in to challenge their guy, which is the banker's guy is Emmanuel Macron. So he's the one that overspent. He created the budget deficit, but they're going to blame the National Rally for suddenly the poor economic performance of France. So this is a rigged game, Freddie. And
yes, it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is, yeah. It's called engineering financial and fiscal panic. That's what these guys do. Although they're not political in natures, but their role will be to smoothen basically a newly elected government, to make sure that when they come into power, they're not going to let basically the borrowing costs or let basically interest rates go, to record highs, like it happens in Italy with Meloni. When she got into power, you saw the market got absolutely mad and the borrowing costs were just skyrocketing, and they let it high until she eventually capitulated and took a knee and say, okay, I'm going to adopt the European political, economic, immigration agenda. And that's it. She was done. She was cooked. So what's going to happen here? It's going to be pretty much the same if the National Rally in France of Marine Le Pen is elected on the 7th of July. We already see it. I mean, we didn't have to wait. They didn't even wait. Straight from the moment Macron called for the snap election, you could see the markets go haywire. And that is simply because the European Central Bank is not doing its job. The market always react, but it really reacts to the extremity when the European Central Bank is not doing its job. And that's exactly what happened. And that's what happened on the 7th of July and the days after. If the National Rally wins, they're going to blackmail basically this engineering of financial and fiscal panic. And then, of course, the media plays an important role. They'll do exactly what they did for COVID. They're going to inject a nice little amount of fear and panic in the country, so everybody feels, oh my God, what have we done? We have the National Rally, the far right, is governing France. This is the end of the world, or World War III. So this is sad, but this is the game that is played. And I think Meloni is a great example on how, completely unelected bodies are capable of actually disturbing the outcome of an elections and absolutely behaving undemocratically when they have no mandate. It's disgusting, but that's what it is.
It's very strategic at the Brussels level, and it doesn't get a lot of attention. People don't talk about it. It's kind of a stealth, invisible hand to strangle any potential outbreak of populism. Okay, it doesn't matter what side of the paradigm it's on. It could be right-wing populism, could be left-wing populism. Look at what happened in Greece with the rise of Syriza, and all of a sudden a 5-alarm fire at the ECB level. The ECB crushed Syriza. They crushed the left wing in Greece. They created economic hardship and turmoil, the likes of which no one had ever seen to that point in Europe. And they did so very strategically. And it had a political element to it. And that's what people don't understand. The real political control is at the Brussels level, and it's to do with finance. They have the power to create, as you said, Freddie, panic, financial panic, crisis. They can do it just by announcing a rate hike or a few headlines from the big, media institutions, and boom, the markets are reacting. People are saying, "Oh my gosh, we can't possibly have, Yanis Varoufakis up there negotiating with it's going to be the end of the world. The economy is going to collapse."
And you have to also look at the other way, the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin is they really let you go with anything as long as you're on the right side of the of the argument. So if you're pro globalist, if you're pro-European, if you're advocating all this policy, whether they're economic or geopolitics, and like Macron did, for example, it doesn't matter if your rates or even your borrowing or your debt is out of bounds. It really doesn't matter. At this stage, they'll let you get away with it. They don't care because eventually they'll pull the plug with a digital currency. So that's really not a problem. But right now, this is an important tool, and trust me, they're going to be using it. They're going to abuse it when the national rally makes it on the 7th of July. That's just the way the game is rigged. As you said, nothing is democratic. It is no democracy anymore. No. People really, I think, understood it now, and I think this is the reason why you're getting so many large scores from this right populist movement. I don't like to call them far right because you can see some of the discourse, the agenda. Some of them are more radical than others, don't get me wrong. But there are some extremely intelligent and capable people. And I think you must just take the best out of these people and let them and give them a chance to bring back the agenda that matters on the ground to the people. Because at the end of the day, this is about people. And if it's no longer about people and about bankers being able to rig the game, don't call it a democracy. We're no longer in any democracy. That doesn't mean anything voting anymore if the games is rigged at the European Union and at the European Central Bank level.
Absolutely. And, France is such a good case study, Freddie, because nobody was raising the alarm. Nobody was protesting when France started digging this deficit hole, which happened because of the magic virus. Okay, everybody, Macron, what a great leader. He's implementing the WF protocols. He's getting those vaccines out in record time, paying people to stay home, shutting down businesses, shutting borders, a total disaster. It created a deficit spending trigger that now we're seeing the after effects of this. And all of a sudden, the ECB is like, this is going to be dangerous if the National Rally gets into power and Le Pen. But they were quite happy to extend all of that line of credit and just destroy the sovereignty of all these European states during COVID. They weakened them. They got them into debt. They got them used to deficit spending. And now all of a sudden, it's a problem. They're picking winners and losers, Freddie, politically. This is about control more than anything. That's what really Brussels is about. We're living
in a big lie. There's no doubt about it. We're living in a big lie, and we've been living in the lie for at least 40 years. As I say, very soon after the Second World War, you can clearly see it. If you can see NATO, the chairman of the military committee of NATO was a general Nazi. His name was Adolf Holzinger, and he was very guys that plans all the invasions in Austria, in Poland, in France, and these guys end up NATO top brass, military commands, and he's a Nazi. The guy was in the Wolf Den with Hitler, when there was an assassination attempt against Hitler.
Oh, don't forget about Kurt Waldheim.
He ended up in NATO, so why not Mark Rutte?
Secretary General of the United Nations, Kurt Waldheim. It's got some great Nazis in top positions. It's great on the resume. When you're applying for the job, they're like, very impressive. Very impressive. Okay.
That's got to count for something, right? That's got to count for something. They're telling you something.
Freddie Ponton, independent researcher, journalist. I appreciate you joining us on TNT this week.
It has been my pleasure.
Here he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Top of the hour news headlines coming up. We got a lot more on the other side. Alan Mizrahi is going to join us. Great political commentator. I'm looking forward to this discussion. A lot coming up. Stay with us. We'll be back in a few.